So first of all, on behalf of the 26th IFFK, International Film Festival of Kerala, very, very pleased and happy and proud to have Miguel Gomes with us. Miguel is an old friend, but known the world over as this filmmaker who everybody is trying to wrap their heads around. And for many, many years at the IFFK, I've been wanting to show his work and not in single bits. We've shown his films, of course, at various times, but I've always wanted to view it as a body of work. And I wanted him to come, but somehow we are always unable. And I mean, the films came together this time, but Miguel can't come. Congratulations on your baby, of course. On the two babies, you've had two babies since we last met. But yeah, so thank you for agreeing to this. And very happy to introduce Anuj Malhotra. Anuj is a young film critic, writes a lot about cinema, thinks a lot about cinema. Also now, recently a practicing filmmaker. He's got into practice. He knows your work well. So we chose Anuj to have this conversation with you. Thank you both for agreeing. Thanks, Anuj. And thanks, Miguel. And welcome to the festival. You all aren't here physically, but certainly in spirit and soul and art and everything. So thank you so much.
You have my soul and my spirit, but next time I want to be physically, because I love Kerala.
You will be here, definitely. We will have you here. So till then, let's have this conversation. So I hand over to Anuj. I may not stay through because, as you know, I'm running from one thing to the other, but I will be here for some time and I would like to listen also. Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Anuj?
Hi, Miguel.
Hello.
Hi. So I wanted to sort of have a general conversation about a variety of things, and variety being the very foundation of a lot of the films and how you construct these worlds within them. There's this whole idea of the manifold, the multitude, the cubist collage in a way. And so my idea was not to refer to specific instances within the films, even though that might happen as well, but just in general to learn from you about ideas and things and objects and how you think of those. And I hope this conversation can therefore assume a more casual, a more comprehensive view as opposed to being about the titles themselves. But let's see how it goes, and I hope this model works as well. So I just wanted to start with asking you in terms of how you perceive the whole subject of memory, because I find that in your films especially there is personal memory, but it also mixes and interacts very interestingly with cinephilic memory, the memory of the films you've watched, the memory of the books you've read. And I was wondering, especially at this point of time in your life, how do you look back and how do you think of an idea so malleable in your films, so liquid in your films like memory?
Yeah, because we can only work with that, with memory. Of course, cinema is making the present. So for instance, I don't believe, or at least I don't have the abilities to, just think about a film before shooting it and deciding everything in advance. So there's many things that happen in the present. It's the day I'm shooting that will define what I'll shoot exactly. But there's this dimension of trying to get what today is giving you and trying to put it on the film. And there's all the past days. And the past days is the past days of my own life, of my memory, of my my feelings toward things and my ideas, and less ideas than I think more my feelings and my
Yeah.
sensitivity to what to the world and to people, and of course to uh, cinema and books and music, because that is not my just my it's also my personal memory, but it's belongs to many people.
Yeah.
It's a collective memory. And so in cinema you work with both, or at least I work with both, with what I remember, the stories I remember, the people I've met, and I try to put something of that into my films. And at the same time, there's this this library of memories
Yeah.
that are into books and music and you know forms of artistic expression that we all share, and this is why we are a community.
Yeah.
And I'm only meeting you, Anuj, today, but I think we can share we share for sure some of these films and and books, and so they belong to us in a collective way. And so I use both. I use both, and so you can recognize in my films um, some of these memories. The idea, for instance, if we talk about taboo, the idea cinema uh, looked at this continent, the Africa continent, um, even if that way to look is a construction. It
Yeah.
was cinema that invented that Africa.
Yeah.
But I'm using it, and I'm also using other things that come from me.
Yeah. And in that regard, I mean, I noticed that, and this is something that we don't tend to use in India. One of the ways in which you're credited in one of the films, and I think in most of the films, is argumento, which is in a way
Which
to,
is
yeah, which
yeah,
is,
argumento is yeah, it's screenplay.
yeah. And but I also thought in terms of your films, it has a specific significance because, like you said, you're not planning the film beforehand and arriving and then responding to the stimuli offered to you by life itself, but you are organizing all of this information and this archive that you've gathered in the edit, in the post production. And I was wondering if that whole aspect of the argument of organizing the world that you've gathered after the fact, uh, how is it that, given that you work with so much randomness and so much of accident and arbitrary material, how is it that you arrive at an argument and organization of this material after the
Mm.
fact?
Well, it's always different, no? But I'll tell you something. There was a film, a moment in my when I was making films, and it was my second feature called Our Beloved Month of August. In that film had a lot to do with also personal memories, but uh, because it's in a region where I knew from childhood, because I have in the it's in the on the countryside, and I have a house. My family has a house in this region, so I know it from going into the summer in this region. And I was also working with the rituals that happen in these moments of the year. Lots of festivities. Um, it's summertime, and there are many people that don't live in this region. They have to live abroad because there's not no much work there, and so they return in this month of August to their region. And there's always a lot of things that happen every year, the same. Uh, every year it happens the same. And so in that case, I had this huge archive of things. There's always fires at that moment of the year, so there's lots of the what's now I forgot the name of the guys that put down the fires, the firemen. So lots of fireman activity, lots of songs, which specific kind of songs, a little bit corny songs, um, lots of love stories between young people. And so I gathered this. But in fact, so this was my archive, yeah, an archive of a region and an archive of personal memories of being in this region. But at the same time, I wrote a normal, screenplay.
Yeah.
There was a script, and there was a moment where the producer came to me and he said, we don't have money to do what's written in this film, so we have to stop and we have to postpone this film and try to find raise more funding to do the film as you wanted to do it. And I thought about that, and 3 days after this I said to the producer, no, I just want a camera and a very small crew, and I want to go there and to reinvent the film while I'm shooting. So let's do half of the shooting. We'll do half of the film. You just give me this month of August. Actually, I think it was 6 weeks. It entered September, but we were there for 6 weeks. Without shooting what was in the script, but shooting also what was in the script, because the script was talking about these things I've told you, the fireman, the songs, the people dancing.
Yeah.
And so I just shoot it, and then I went to edit this part of the film, and I wrote again the script, knowing, but in a very simplified way, because we have already shown lots of things in the film. We have captured in a documental way lots of things that were part of the script. We just got them in like in a documentary way, not put it inside the film. But then, as I have already this, I could, not, I didn't had to spend much money organizing this huge, dancing and people singing, because we have already it in the film. So I discovered that this was the moment where I discovered, in a very practical way, that when we have problems to do what we have planned to do, there is always like the normal solution. The normal solution is, let's cut up some scenes. Let's do the same thing as we have planned, but in less days, in a poor version. And this is like the production way to do it, which is the normal one. And I discovered that maybe it's better to reinvent the film on your own terms. And I discovered that my own terms in that film, and then after on other films, was to try to lose control of what I have planned. Sometimes put the script, the previous script, on the trash can, and just, but try to recatch all the elements or some of the elements you have developed in this script, and go to the place and start to shoot. And then we trying to to regain control as I was shooting it and thinking about what I could change in the film in order to to have a logical film, something that would make sense.
Yeah.
Uh, but it's another sense, not the one I've planned in the beginning.
I mean, there is, when I hear you describe this process, there is tremendous freedom in it, but there's also a feeling of terror, which is that the film could devolve into chaos at any given point in time and you could abandon logic. And in general, there is this ambitious mixage in your films, which we refer to as the epic form in India, because we generally have a culture which really prioritizes oral storytelling. So we have the grandmother's tale mixing with the news and the scientific report mixing with the conspiracy theory in the neighborhood. And I was wondering, when you work with such freedom, but also such chaos, um, is this a form that you arrived at? Is this a choice that you arrived at through conscious meditation? Is this something, does this have a basis perhaps in Portuguese storytelling traditions, or is this a form that's very personal to you of the collage?
Well, there are people that think that my films are chaotic in a very bad way. So I think that I'm dealing with this chaos. I'm glad that you think I succeed to do something with it, but there are some people that don't agree with you. Um, I don't know if it has something to do with Portuguese tradition. Uh, in my case, it came with the story I've told you by the fact that I didn't have money to do what I've planned, so I improvised, and it started that way. And then I started to see the qualities of the things that I could achieve to put in a film proceeding that way. But in general terms, in Portuguese cinema, we don't have an industry. So there are not so many films. We don't have an industry of cinema because our market, the country is very small, and there are no habits of going to cinema that much. And so we are very limited economically. So there is not kind of mass production of Portuguese cinema. So the films that we make are normally low budget, and when you shoot with less money, you can afford to be more personal. Um, so there's, I think that in the tradition of Portuguese cinema, at least since the 60s, from the new wave of Portuguese cinema in the 60s, um, the cinema in Portugal had sometimes had um, this quality of improvisation and just people trying, don't having much money to do the films, and so improvising and trying to go somewhere with just improvising, and this is a general characteristic in Portuguese cinema, from the 60s to now. But as I said, in my own case, it came from necessity, and then I liked it.
So I have a couple of questions, but I'll just follow up with the one that sort of is a yield of and emerges from the answer that you just shared with us. And given that there is so much interplay of the ethnographic, direct, or the militant image, as you call it, with the fantasy image, with the image of the fable, and the fact that there are certain people who respond to your film as being too chaotic, how is this notion of reality within cinema or realism, is it essential to you? Because there is a debate about reality as opposed to truth. And I feel the larger embroidery of the structures that you build in the films may not be real in the sense the cinema verite, but they do reveal larger structures of truth about the human condition and about how people live. But is that a question that you actively think about and reflect upon as well?
That's a big and complicated question, no? But there is a film I've made, uh, Arabian Nights, which is a big film, at least there, three films. When I was shooting, I didn't knew that it would give three volumes, three films separately, but it in the end it was like that. And in this film, um, I was dealing with that in a very concrete way because I had two very opposite sources for making the film. One was, the book Arabian Nights and the structure and the idea, of telling tales, telling the world, telling about people, about the world, about the relation between people, different classes of people, through, the most delirious kind of fiction uh, and storytelling. And on the other hand, I was trying to deal with an economical crisis that happened at that moment where I was shooting, that forced the MFI to come to Portugal and impose very strict rules, economical rules, and that of course affected the most of the people in Portugal. And so it's like very two different worlds, no? Something that we are all living, a social issue that is happening in the present, and on the other hand, this kind of very, fantasy kind of storytelling. And there is a moment in the film, we have a discussion between Sherazad, the character of Sherazad, who is the narrator of the film, and her father. And at that moment, sorry, my phone. At that moment, Sherazad doesn't recall very well why the hell she's telling stories. What's the use of it? And the father tries to make her remember that telling stories, what is the importance to tell stories? Because I think that the reality of fiction, which doesn't come, which didn't happen in the real world, that doesn't appear in statistics, but it's so real for us in our minds as the reality of what we share, what we call reality. And I think that one cannot live without the other. So my idea was to make a complete portrait of what I'm trying to do in this film, of my country at that moment. I have to have some elements of what is happening. I mean, people affected by the situation, or, in many different ways, elements of reality that appear through all the film. And on the other hand, I have to transform that into imaginary, into, uh, because one needs the other. You need stories, you need like a mythical context to make cinema for me. This is very important for me. And so you need, but you cannot just do, Star Wars. And I cannot do Star Wars and to have something that it doesn't connect with which is completely closed in itself. So I need to have a relation with our days and what is happening.
Yeah.
So I cannot choose. I have to have both. I have to have fantasy and to have reality, and both tell truths about what is happening.
Yeah, and I mean, with Arabian Nights, what I found really fascinating about the structure is that the reality, the so-called reality, and the condition of uh, present-day Portugal is actually a departure from the fantasy. And in general, with Hollywood cinema, it's the reverse, where fantasy or the musical number, or as is common with Bollywood films, is the departure from the so-called real. And I found that to be an odd reversal, but one that also leads to a friction within the film between these two forms. It's almost as if there is an internal reflection on the part of the filmmaker, much like how you described that of Sherzad, in terms of why you're telling these stories at a time like this. And I was wondering if this was a crisis inherent within you during the entire production of the film, because it this friction, at least to me as a subjective viewer, does reflect when I watch the film 6 to 7 years later after it was made.
Well, yeah, my character, because I also play a character in the film in the beginning, as he tells this, he confesses that he is in a complicated situation because he tried to do something that was impossible, to combine all this in a harmonious way
Yeah.
without betraying reality or being really committed into the fiction.
Yeah.
So this is what my character says, but you cannot believe what characters say in cinema.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't know if there was a crisis. I think this friction you feel, this is what I think it's cinema. The friction in every film is the cinema.
Yeah.
Uh, is when you have like opposite poles
Mm.
and they do something. I mean, they are not just connecting in a perfect way. They are like you have like a battle, and this battle of opposite things is what allow. When I say it's the cinema, is because I think it's what allows the viewer to be part of the film, because being put between two different things that are fighting each other, you are in the middle, the viewer is in the middle, and everything is not, you don't have this sensation of having only one feeling, everything being very clear. You are it's you are in an active role as a viewer because you have two different logics clashing and you're in the middle, and so you're starting to move, not in the chair. I think, I mean, if you want, you can move on the chair of the theater, but moving on your mind. Just this is why some people think that a certain scene or a certain moment of the film is very ironical, and other people think it's moving because maybe it's moving and ironical at the same time. So this friction, the fact that there are two different logicals opposing, is what make you alive. I think it's what makes the film alive and make you alive and not passive as a viewer.
Yeah. But do you also find that this is in general more lifelike, because life in itself is a containment of all these diversity of rhythms and logics and inherent chaos
No,
and beauty of
I don't think it's like in life. I think it's like in cinema. At least the cinema I care, and this cinema can come from very mainstream, kind of environment. when, for instance, we are talking about musicals, and you talk about musicals, and for instance, Guru Dutt, which is for instance, one of my favorite filmmakers is Guru Dutt,
Yeah.
and he was working in a completed industry with all the rituals, all the things you have in uh, in Indian cinema at that period.
Yeah.
And there is something very alive in his films.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's not only because he's like a perfect, he's one of the best, the most virtuous guy working with the mise en scène, the position of how it draws the scene. That's one of the best ever lived. But at the same time, this is so good because it has only opposite. It has always something opposing inside the scenes.
Yeah.
And so it's not only in in art house cinema that this exists. This existed in every form of cinema from the beginning of history of cinema in very different countries. And so this kind of thing that for me it makes the difference between a film being dead or alive is comes from mainstream cinema in USA or in Indian cinema or in art house Portuguese cinema. It exists always in different ways,
Yeah.
but it's always there for
Yeah.
me.
I mean, ironically, Indian cinema seems to be transitioning to the Hollywood aggressive continuity form, and it's actually abandoning all of these more fantastical traditions because it wants to be more real and, I suppose, acceptable in the global market. But I find it very interesting that you've talked about Guru Dutt, because even in his films, there was a inherent awareness of the industry that actually produces those films.
Yeah,
And in your case, it is obviously more explicit in that you might actually see the crew and you will actually see the sound recordist, and there will be conversations about the money that needs to come in from Lisbon. And I find that interesting, this revelation of the artifice that produces the film. Uh, it's inherently political also because it discusses labor. But that aside, how is this idea of the artifice within cinema and making it visible to the audiences? How is this essential to your process as a filmmaker?
this I always say that my favorite film. I don't know if it's my favorite film, but uh, maybe it is. It's The Wizard of Oz. And The Wizard of Oz. It's of course it's one of the best films about cinema ever made because it's about this girl and her dog, and they live in the countryside in Kansas, in USA, and then she goes to another place called Oz, and Oz, of course, it's cinema, and um, and then she returns home. But there's always these two. There's home, uh, and there is cinema. There is this territory with different rules, with a different, look. It's Technicolor, the world of Oz, and so your question was,
My question was this awareness of the industry of filmmaking, which in a way leads to the making of the artificial aspect, the plastic aspect of cinema visible? How is that involved?
So having this Wizard of Oz as one of my references, uh, it's not only because these characters, they go to Oz to find themselves, to try to have something they have lost. No, the lion and the girl, and they go to Oz, and so and they go to the most artificial kind of cinema
Yeah.
that exists, which is musical comedy and designed in that way. Uh, and so, as I said before, there is. It was you that told the idea of truth becoming also from very kind of non-realistic approach,
Yeah.
and this is art in general does that. No, it's we are not pretending to have real life. We have it's another world with different rules, but it's a world that is talking about our world.
Yeah.
And so Oz is talking about Kansas.
Yeah.
In the end, maybe Oz was always Kansas. It's how the film ends. Um, so it's just another way to look at things.
Yeah.
And so I think we need this artificiality too. Um, and it's like I've told you about the Arabian Nights. We need both.
Yeah. And but also to meditate further on this, on the aspect of the actual industry that produces these films, of the people whose bodies are involved in the production of these films, and how you make that aspect visible. Also talking about the funding uh, within the film, and I feel that establishes the film as an object that emerges from society and not just something they watch passively. And is that a means by which the filmmaker also reflects upon their position within the larger social fabric, in terms of how you relate to all these people?
I think I'm one of the maybe my generation in Europe is the last generation that had not to deal in such aggressive way with a very what I feel that today is a very claustrophobic um, logical of logics of the funding system. I think that art house cinemas in a way started to be so square
Yeah.
as in mainstream Hollywood cinema, or maybe Bombay cinema, I don't know,
Yeah.
Bollywood cinema. So because it's different rules, but they are so rigid as the rules of the mainstream, cinema. And but this, I think it's worse. For instance, now I've seen this, young people, kids that have 20, 25, 30 years old. And so they started to make their own films
Yeah.
not so long ago. And when they have some success on the festivals or something, they are a little bit forced to do all these pitchings, and so they are submitted to the system in a very aggressive way.
Mm.
And for instance, I come from Portuguese cinema. I started my first short film. It was in 1999.
Yeah.
And of course, there was the fundings and the European fundings already in function, but I think in a less aggressive way. And I remember some of the big directors or the good directors of Portuguese cinema, the ones that I care about in Portuguese cinema, like for instance, of course, Manuel de Oliveira and João César Monteiro, and they made these very wild films that I think if Oliveira and Monteiro were presenting films today to to these commissions, they would have no chance to do these films because they were real wild, um, out of the normal rules of what. So I think I also benefited from this, from what came before me. And the idea of Portuguese cinema can be a little bit out of the box.
Yeah.
And so this was something that I had already. It was easier because of these guys, these brilliant guys that made their films in with this freedom. And but I think nowadays it's more complicated for people that are starting to make films. I think they cannot be so wild as these guys were in the beginning, because it's always the same question. When you have more money, when you have more money available, there are more rules attached.
Yeah.
And so in a way it's good for them to have more money available and more people starting to be able to shoot. At the same time, the rules are, I think they are not so good for people to do really their own stuff and not be so calculistic about what society needs or what they think what that society needs, which is different.
But does that also affect an ongoing practice such as yourselves? I mean, given that critics by themselves and the fact that you've been a critic and I write, we organize these vocabularies around filmmakers. So there are certain ways in which we bracket and categorize and identify them. And so can that rigidity, both in terms of how a filmmaker is spoken about, but also how their films are funded and the reasons they are funded for, affect an ongoing practice such as yours, and not merely the work of someone who's maybe making their first or the second film?
No, I didn't got the critics. You are talking about the critics like an extension of this logical of the fundings.
Yeah, which is that we
Yeah,
recognize the filmmakers for certain qualities, and so we want their films to have those.
well, I think that uh, the critics, at least in my own view, the critics are not so rigid in a, as the funding system. Maybe I don't know well how it is in India or, but internationally, of course, you have like mainstream critics and that are basically publicists. And they work for the system, of course. But I think you still have in through the world people that think in their own terms and have a real dialogue with the film, a real connection with the film in a free way. So, which is something that, for instance, a television committee to decide to give you money or not doesn't have, because they are interested in knowing what's the length of the film, who's playing in the film, the normal stuff we know. And critics are, I mean, there are always bad critics, but I think there are some that are also, I think the filmmakers would be in in a poor position if there were not these guys, the critics. I'm telling this, maybe you think, okay, this guy was also a critic, so, but no, I think maybe it has something to do with that, but I think that uh, it's really when I started to be critic, I made it for like 4 years. Um, it was an accident too. There's lots of things that happen in my activity of cinema that are accidents. And in this case, I was film critic because I could not work in cinema because I came out of film school and I didn't have a good reputation as a student. I went to production, which is because I was not a good student. So the bad students, they go to production. And I went to production. And of course, I was I was awful, not good for production. My specialty is not organizing things. Um, so no one would have me on any film, on any crew.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know what to do. I didn't have any perspectives of working on cinema. And then there was someone that a friend of mine that was working on a newspaper and asked me if I wanted to try to make a review, and I did it because I didn't have any choice. And then I continued, and I went to another newspaper, and I did that for 4 years. And I think I had this reputation of not being gentle in my reviews. Um, and so I think then I applied to the first funding in Portugal to the first short film. And the jury of this committee decided to give me the money for making this short film. But I have always the idea that they gave me only to punish me, because I was saying bad things about other guys' films. And so I think they thought, let's give money to this guy for him to understand how difficult it is to make films, and he'll do
Yeah.
maybe a shitty film. So this is, I think this is why I started to make films. But I don't consider myself, even at that moment, of course I was a film critic, but I never saw this as something that was my goal or something that would be important for me in my life.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about Sugwa Diaries. Am I pronouncing it correctly? Your
Yeah.
name, and it struck me as being, if I can use the word, distinctly apocalyptic in the sense of it, how there's an actual countdown within the film, in terms of a reverse structure, and I've read how you use that to actually diffuse the linear structure of stories. Uh, but just the effect of how much the global situation of the pandemic that we find ourselves in also shapes the film in terms of imbuing it with a certain boredom as a quality, in terms of imbuing it with a certain sense of a collective spirit, but also this nature of doom and apocalypse of a structure coming apart. Uh, were those feelings that, obviously, those are feelings that I received, but are some of those intended? Were something qualities that you were maybe conscious of while making the film?
Yeah, I think it's very nice. you are always, this is why, you're also a film critic. You're making
Yeah.
films too, but you're also a film critic. And this is why I valorize, um, film critics talking to us and connecting with the films and saying something about the films that sometimes even the filmmakers don't know, and sometimes they say, that's
Yeah.
maybe he's right. So I never have thought about the countdown as as
Yeah.
this kind of apocalyptical,
Yeah.
but you have a point there.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, this is a different film for me because it's not my film.
Yeah.
It's a shared experience with Maureen Fazendeiro, which also happens to be my wife, and but it's also a filmmaker, and we made the film. We co-directed the film, and yeah, that I think we were dealing with the situation, the COVID situation, because we shot it just after we decided to shoot the film just after leaving the first lockdown here in Portugal, and which was in March, and then we were shooting on the summer on August we were shooting, and and yeah, it has this kind of what I was talking with you. You have to make cinema. You need two different kind of almost two opposite things, and so we're dealing with COVID, which is not a pleasant thing for none of us, and with this kind of subtext of apocalyptical thing. And but in another way, we were also the film. I think it's mostly about this desire of being together again with people, and so this collective community that you also talked about, and so the film lives in this tension, in this friction, as you told, this friction between this utopia of a collective reconnecting in social terms
Yeah.
in and in this context of the pandemic. And
Yeah.
it was a film that I think we really enjoyed to do, because it was in a way like an alternative lockdown, because it was just some weeks after the real lockdown, and we and the crew and the actors and some dogs, we went to this place, to a farm. It's like a farm with a house, and we just lived there. And so our life and our work doing the film and living in the same
Yeah.
place on the sets of the film uh, was something that I think it was a much better idea of lockdown than the real one.
Yeah.
And and so yeah, I think it's in a very pessimistic a very not so good situation, we try to do like an optimistic film.
Yeah.
It's still possible to work even in the most complicated moment of the pandemic, when we didn't knew much how was going to happen, in a situation where at that moment here in Portugal and in most of the countries, everything was closed down. No one was shooting. It was still possible to do something, but trying to have the same rules that were imposing to us, and trying to do something different with this kind of rules.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, I have a good memory of making that.
but is the situation in general and the pandemic sort of sustains as a residue almost even now, uh, is it has it pronounced for you this desire for collective activity, collective exercise, and how do
Yeah,
you relate that to the often solitary portions of or the solitary aspects of making films, and how do these reconcile with each other?
yeah. We started to start to when we start this conversation. One of the first things we talked was this idea of having working with personal memories and collective memories. And so in this case, of course, we had this situation that was completely collective. I mean, it was more collective than this. It's quite difficult. No, it's all over the planet, people living in different ways, the situation. And in our life, in our personal life, me and Maureen's life, we had very we we were going to be to have a son, a daughter, um, and so this was a personal thing, and we also think that maybe we this film has something to do also with that, with it's also a portrait of a couple that are going to have a first son, and so yeah, it's your question was.
So my question was, how do you think of the more solitary aspects of filmmaking, which could be the writing process, and as opposed to the since you mentioned the word collective so much and community so much, and we've also discussed the industry of filmmaking, the industrial nature of it, and how do you think of these as an individual?
Yeah, it's like in the case of the Chubwa Diaries, there is this context, and we are reacting to things at the general context, social context, or what is happening, and to our own lives, and there is a desire to do something, to react, to do. If there in the case of Arabian Nights, there's a sudden economical crisis and social crisis, and I react to that with with what I can do, which is making films. It's what I do, and or in case of the Chugwa Daris, there is this pandemic, and it doesn't have to be like that all the time. Uh, but so it comes from our life. It doesn't come, and it comes from my own life, and then there's the process of making a film, and the process of making a film, for me at least, is not is with other people, and so it started by something that was personal, and then uh, we tried to still continue to be personal, but with more people in a collective way. And it's not, yeah, sometimes it's not very industrial. Sometimes it gets a little bit industrial too, because when we are going to do more complicated things and we need more people, but until this moment, I achieved to do it on my own terms. And when I say my own terms, I'm talking about myself and the other people involved that define what is going to be the film. Because if I'm shooting with some guy, an actor or a non-actor, or the cinematographer or the sound man, they always have something of their own that changes, that I have to use in the film, and I don't have any choice. I have to use it,
Yeah.
and that's good.
Yeah. And um, I just, I mean, I think I'd like to, I mean, even though this is a bit of a diversion from what we've been talking about, but I noticed in the face you deserve, especially because the usage of the sound, but also I think it relates to the whole idea of the friction and of the mixage that you're talking about. And it's also detailed this usage of the sound at the in the closing sequence of our beloved month of August. But I was very cognizant and aware of how you mix natural and artificial sounds in the fairy tale world of the face you deserve, and I found that to be a very fascinating assemblage, and not just in approaches and images, but there is this extremely elaborate work that you also do with the design of the sound. And I was wondering if there is a conscious process to actually arrive at that. This is a bit technical, but I'm curious.
Yes, because I work with very good people in the sound, and the sound is something very important for me. Maybe sometimes more important than image. Um, and I have these guys. One is, of course, this guy that appears in the end of the face of the our beloved month of August. Vasco Pimentel is a sound man that worked with lots of people um, in Portugal, in Europe, and he's a very no way he's a kind of crazy guy, but in what I think it's a good way. And he has also this idea of what it tells in the end of this scene um, of our beloved month of August, the ending scene, the idea of that uh, when he's recording sound, he's always putting something of his own memories and sensibility into the sound. And so he creates sound that doesn't exist in reality. Is yeah, he's very. I work with this guy, and he's kind of very something of his passion of sound and cinema appears in the quality of the sound he records. And then I have another one that doesn't appear that much in the. He appears in the Tsuguadaris too. Is maybe the guy that is dancing in the most
Yep.
skilled way in the end of Tsuguadaris. Is called Miguel Martins, and is the editor of sound and also the mixer. He does the mixing of my films, and is very good too. And I worked with him almost since the beginning. I think that our the face you deserve is still Vasco Pimentel that mixes, but they are they were almost both mixing, and he did the sound editing, and the sound editing of that film of the face you deserve was very produced because in that film, of course, we were dealing with the kind of fairy stories, tales, fairy tales of this kind of world of childhood, and uh, and so the sound, in a way, would have to be very artificial, uh, very like drawn and a little bit baroque.
Yeah.
But for every film, we have very different approaches, because just after the face you deserved, which is quite drawn the sound and in a very stylized way, we have our beloved month of August, which is very physical, very brutal,
Yeah.
So sometimes it's like a mess, like a very solid kind of sound with distortion,
Yeah.
and so it's a little bit like the opposite approach of The Face You Deserve. But this come from the experience of making the film. It's not like, as we were talking about these commissions, they ask you all these things, what the film will look like, what the film will sound, and I don't know. If they ask me, to be
Yeah.
honest, I can say
Yeah.
bullshit, of course, and I'll do it a lot. But uh, if I have to be honest, I have to say I don't know. I have to do it first.
Yeah.
And so this kind of sound that exists in, for instance, in the face you deserved, and this the sound that we have in our beloved month of August that came a lot from the experience of being there and being at that festivities, and the kind of sound and the sound, the equipment they had in these places. This gave, the kind of uh, sensation of what would have to be the sound of the film. And so in every film, it's different. Of course, afterwards it was Taboo, and Taboo, it's it we had thought since the beginning that we didn't have to have dialogues. We didn't want dialogues in the second part of the film, and this gives also a very physical sensation of the mood of the film. The kind of sound that we had, the sound that Vasco captured in Mozambique, um, and the fact that we were listening to that and not hearing the actors because they were moving the lips, and we didn't have the dialogues. We had the voice over of the narrator, and and so this was the sound we found also for that film, making it, even if that case it was predefined that we didn't want dialogues and we would have a voiceover in the second part of the film. The kind of sound we would have in the film was, we found it there. We found it there as we understood what is the best way to do with the actors is them just pretending to be moving their lips, and we just record like this, like we will see in the film, or we'll put them saying dialogues and then we'll just cut the dialogues and we just mix with the environment sound, and it was different in every scene. It was so we took that decision listening to what was the scene we were making, and every day was different.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the word childhood, and I mean, while I was watching your films, I was actually thinking a lot about Cocteau, and especially in terms of the ruptures that happen within all of your films and the shifts that take place. And there's especially a sequence, I think, in A Blood of a Poet where he has to walk through a mirror to get to his dead wife, and the question of how do you shoot a character walking through a mirror in a film, and Cocteau just shoots a close up of a finger going through the mirror, and the character just enters. So there is no larger parenthesis of the film becoming from real to the fantastical. And I often thought that the films that he made were very childlike. There was a sense of a wonder about them, a sustained wonder. Um, and this whole idea that you've also talked about the nonsense form, the bullshit form, which is very resident to how children really perceive the world. Is that something that you think consciously of the fairy tale, of the fable of that you read as a child, and that you would perhaps like to sustain as you grow older as an individual? Is that something that's important to you?
Well, uh, I think that there's a very um, a very solid connection between cinema and childhood, uh, and so they making films and have this kind of same logical believing in things that it's not possible to believe after growing up is something that it is very present in cinema, and it is very present, of course. It comes from childhood. And but talking about childhood, my daughter baby just wake up, and so I think that reality and childhood appeared, and I think we all are, and I think that I have to I have to go
Sure.
for. Sorry, I don't know if you have like a last question
No, I don't.
or,
Really enjoyed.
but
Yeah, I really enjoyed talking to you, Miguel. So yeah, thank
okay,
you.
no, it was also a pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for the festival for showing my films.